October 15th, 2019, Vancouver, Stage 7. Tommy Valdez had been drinking since lunch. The entire crew knew it. What they didn't know was that Marcus Sterling's mother had died on this exact soundstage 30 years ago. When Valdez stumbled through his lines for the seventh take, he turned to Sterling and slurred 6 words about his dead mother that made the blood drain from every face in the room. Sterling stood perfectly still. Cameras stopped rolling. 40 crew members held their breath. Then Sterling spoke 6 words back. Security guards would later say they'd never seen a man's face change color that fast. The director would claim he'd never heard silence that loud. And Tommy Valdez would spend the next week in a psychiatric hold repeating the same phrase over and over. He knows what we did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The paramedics arrived 14 minutes later, their boots squeaking against the polished concrete of Stage 7 as they loaded Tommy Valdez onto a stretcher. His eyes rolled white, pupils dilated, muttering those same 6 words like a broken prayer. He knows what we did. Marcus Sterling hadn't moved from his position beside the craft services table, his manicured fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The liquid trembled almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the most powerful talent agent in Hollywood wasn't carved from marble. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Director Sarah Chen approached cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. What did you say to him? Marcus's gray eyes followed the stretcher as it disappeared through the soundstage doors. Rain hammered against the corrugated roof 30 feet above, the same relentless Vancouver downpour that had been falling for 3 days straight. The same kind of rain that had been falling the night his mother died. Nothing he didn't already know, Marcus replied, his voice carrying that familiar edge of controlled menace that had built Sterling Talent Management into a billion-dollar empire. The crew began dismantling equipment with nervous efficiency, eager to escape whatever darkness had just unfolded. Grips coiled cables with shaking hands. Script supervisors packed their notes without making eye contact. In 30 years of filmmaking, none of them had seen anything like what had just happened to Tommy Valdez. Marcus crushed the paper cup in his fist, coffee dregs spattering the concrete like blood drops. Stage 7. He should have known the universe would bring him back here eventually. Everything in Hollywood was cyclical careers, scandals, sins coming home to roost. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, 5 missed calls from Variety. TMZ is sniffing around. How do you want me to handle this? He typed back with steady fingers, standard protocol. Medical emergency. No comment. But this wasn't standard. Nothing about today was standard. Valdez's drunken words had torn open a wound Marcus had spent 3 decades sealing with calculated silence and strategic favors. The actor's slurred accusation about his mother, about what happened in her final hours, had been like a key turning in a lock he'd welded shut. Marcus! Sarah Chen was still there, clipboard clutched against her chest like armor. The studio's going to want answers. Valdez is the lead. We're already 2 weeks behind schedule. Tommy will be fine, Marcus said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Men didn't come back from the kind of psychological break they'd just witnessed. Get me his medical records, all of them, going back 5 years. I can't just... Sarah! Her name fell from his lips like a scalpel. Do you remember who got you this job? Who convinced the studio to take a chance on an indie director for a $50 million tentpole? She nodded, color draining from her cheeks. Then get me those records. As she hurried away, Marcus allowed himself one moment of weakness. He closed his eyes and let the sound of rain transport him back 30 years to another October night, another storm, another tragedy on this cursed stage. Helena Sterling, 34 years old, found dead at the bottom of her trailer steps. Cause of death: blunt force trauma from the fall. The official report cited wet stairs and alcohol in her system. Case closed in 48 hours. But Marcus had been 17 then, just a kid hanging around set because his mother couldn't afford a babysitter. He'd seen things that night, heard voices from inside the trailer before she fell, witnessed shadows moving in the darkness that the police report never mentioned. He'd kept quiet. They'd made sure he kept quiet. Now, 3 decades later, he was back where it all began. And somehow, impossibly, Tommy Valdez knew about that night. Valdez, who would have been barely 28 in 1989, working as a struggling actor in bit parts in B-movies. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Sterling, didn't expect to hear from you." "Eddie," Marcus said, "I need a favor." Detective Eddie Kowalski had been working Vancouver PD for 40 years, 31 of them since Helena Sterling's death. He owed Marcus more favors than either man cared to count. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that requires looking at old files, very old files." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the drumming rain and the distant sound of equipment being wheeled away. "Marcus," Eddie said finally, "some files are better left closed." "Not this time. That business from '89 is exactly what I need you to look at." Another pause. "Then meet me at the usual place, 1 hour." The line went dead. Marcus slipped the phone back into his jacket and took one last look around Stage 7. Somewhere in this maze of shadows and secrets lay the truth about his mother's death. And if Tommy Valdez really knew what happened that night, then Marcus was about to discover just how deep the conspiracy went. The rain kept falling, washing nothing clean. The usual place was Kowalski's Diner on East Hastings, a greasy spoon that had survived 4 decades of gentrification through sheer stubbornness and the best coffee in the city. Marcus parked across the street and watched the neon sign flicker through his rearview mirror. KOWALSKI blinked in sickly pink letters, casting shadows that reminded him of crime scene photos. He should call Sophia. His daughter would be getting ready for bed in their Malibu estate, probably curled up with one of her philosophy textbooks from UCLA. She'd inherited his mother's eyes, the same warm brown that had made Helena Sterling so compelling on camera, so vulnerable off it. Those eyes had been closed when they'd found her body 30 years ago. Rainwater mixing with blood on the trailer steps. Marcus pulled out his phone and speed-dialed home. "Dad?" Sophia's voice was bright, untainted by the darkness he carried. "How's the Vancouver shoot going? Mom said Tommy Valdez looked terrible at the pre-production meeting." "Sophia." Just saying her name softened something in his chest. "How's your Nietzsche paper coming along?" "Beyond good and evil, thanks for asking." She laughed, that musical sound that reminded him why he'd built his empire in the first place. Not for power, not for revenge. For her safety, her education, her future unburdened by the sins of previous generations. "Seriously though, you sound tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" Through the diner window, Marcus spotted Detective Eddie Kowalski sliding into their regular booth, his gray hair damp from the rain. Eddie looked older now, shoulders bent under the weight of 4 decades of Vancouver's secrets. But he'd been there that night in 1989. He'd seen what Marcus had seen, done what needed to be done to protect a traumatized 17-year-old from becoming collateral damage. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with some production issues." "Dad," Sophia's voice took on that patient tone she used when she could see through his deflections. "You know you can talk to me about things, right? I'm not a kid anymore." She was 22, brilliant, beautiful, and completely ignorant of the blood money that had paid for her Ivy League education. Marcus had made sure of that. Every dirty deal, every buried scandal, every carefully orchestrated silence, it all served the singular purpose of keeping Sophia's world clean. "I know, Soph, but some things are better left in the past," she finished his sentence, with the same inflection he used, making him smile despite everything. "You sound like Grandma Helena sometimes. She used to say that to Mom." The mention of his mother hit him like a physical blow. Sophia had never met Helena Sterling, had only known her through carefully curated stories and heavily edited photo albums. The truth about Helena's final months, about the desperation and fear that had consumed her before that last movie, those stories Marcus had buried along with everything else. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said finally, "and stubborn, like someone else I know." Sophia's affection wrapped around him through the phone line. "Promise me you'll get some sleep tonight and maybe call Dr. Brennan if these nightmares come back." The nightmares. They'd started 6 months ago, around the time Sterling Talent Management had signed the deal for this Vancouver production. Dreams of rain-slicked trailer steps, of voices arguing behind thin walls, of a teenage boy watching his world collapse in real time. Dr. Brennan had suggested they might be triggered by stress, by returning to the place where his trauma began. Dr. Brennan didn't know about the missing police files, didn't know about the studio executives who died in convenient accidents over the past 3 decades, didn't know that Marcus's nightmares weren't memories surfacing randomly, they were warnings. "I'll call her," Marcus lied. "Now go finish that paper. Nietzsche would be disappointed in procrastination." "Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart." The line went dead, taking Sophia's warmth with it. Marcus sat for a moment in the car's leather-scented silence, watching Eddie Kowalski order his usual black coffee through the rain-streaked window. In 1 hour, he'd learn whether Tommy Valdez's breakdown was random psychosis or something far more dangerous. Whether the past Marcus had spent 30 years burying was finally clawing its way to the surface. He thought about Sophia's laugh, about her trust, about the future he'd built for her on foundations of necessary lies. Then Marcus Sterling stepped into the rain and walked toward the truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The diner's warmth hit Marcus like a wall as he pushed through the door, bell chiming overhead with the same cheerless note it had made for 30 years. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease triggered a memory flash 17 years old, sitting in this same booth with Eddie Kowalski at 3 in the morning, both of them trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed on stage 7. Eddie looked up from his coffee, and Marcus saw his own exhaustion reflected in the detective's weathered face. 40 years of police work had carved deep lines around Eddie's eyes, but it was the guilt that had aged him most, the weight of the choices they'd made that October night in 1989. "You look like hell, Sterling." "Feeling about the same." Marcus slid into the booth opposite Eddie, the vinyl cracking under his weight. The same spot where he'd sat 3 decades ago, blood still under his fingernails from cradling his mother's body. "Tell me you brought what I asked for." Eddie's thick fingers drummed against his coffee cup, a nervous habit Marcus remembered from that first night, when the detective had explained why the police report would need to be simplified. "Marcus, I've been thinking about this for the past hour. Maybe we should let sleeping dogs lie." "The dogs aren't sleeping anymore." Marcus kept his voice low, aware of the late-night clientele scattered throughout the diner. Taxi drivers, night shift workers, insomniacs seeking refuge from their demons. Tommy Valdez knew something today, something specific. "Valdez is a drunk and a has-been. Could be he knew about my mother." The words came out harder than Marcus intended, causing the waitress at the counter to glance their way. "He knew details that were never made public." Eddie's face went pale. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope thick with papers and photographs. "I pulled everything from storage, the original file, the witness statements, the crime scene photos, even the stuff that didn't make it into the official report." Marcus's hands remained steady as he took the envelope, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Inside were the answers he'd spent 30 years avoiding, the truth that had shaped every decision he'd made since. "What about the other files, the ones we discussed?" "That's where things get complicated." Eddie leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 of the 5 people who gave statements that night are dead. Car accidents, heart attacks, overdose, all within the past decade. The coffee Marcus hadn't ordered grew cold in front of him as the implication sank in. "That's not coincidence." "No, it's not." Eddie's eyes darted toward the window where rain continued its relentless assault on the glass. "Someone's been cleaning house, Marcus, systematically removing anyone who might remember what really happened." Marcus opened the envelope with surgical precision, his fingers finding the photograph on top his mother's body at the base of the trailer steps, her dark hair fanned out in the rain like spilled ink. Helena Sterling at 34, her dreams finally dead along with everything else. But it was the second photograph that stopped his breath entirely. A wide shot of the crime scene, taken from 20 feet away. In the background, barely visible in the trailer's lit window, stood a figure Marcus had never seen before. Someone who'd been inside Helena's trailer but had never appeared in any witness statement. Someone the investigating officers had overlooked or chosen to ignore. "Eddie!" Marcus's voice came out strangled. "Who is this?" The detective followed Marcus's finger to the shadowy figure in the window. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice that." "Notice it? How is this the first time I'm seeing this photograph?" "Because it was buried. Filed under a different case number, mislabeled as evidence from a break-in 2 blocks away." Eddie's coffee cup rattled against the table as he set it down. "I only found it last month when they were digitizing old files. Been losing sleep over it ever since." Marcus stared at the figure in the window, tall, well-dressed, clearly male but too obscured by shadows and rain to identify. Someone who'd been with his mother in her final moments. Someone who'd vanished into the night while Marcus discovered her body. "There's more," Eddie continued, his voice heavy with dread. "The coroner's report. The original one before it was amended." He pulled out a yellow document covered in medical terminology and official stamps. Marcus scanned the pages until he found what Eddie was indicating. A note in the margin, handwritten by the coroner, bruising pattern inconsistent with fall. Suggest further investigation. The note had been crossed out in different ink, initialed by someone whose signature Marcus couldn't make out. "She didn't fall," Marcus whispered, the truth finally crystallizing after 3 decades of willful blindness. Someone pushed her, and someone made sure the investigation died with her. The diner around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the photographs, the buried evidence, and the devastating realization that everything Marcus had built his life on was a lie. His mother hadn't died in a tragic accident. She'd been murdered, and he'd spent 30 years protecting her killer. His phone buzzed against the table. A text message from an unknown number: "Stop digging or Sophia learns the truth about her grandfather." Marcus's blood turned to ice. No one outside his immediate family knew about Sophia's connection to Helena Sterling. No one except Eddie, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Where exactly did you say you found this file?" But when he looked up, Detective Eddie Kowalski was already reaching for his gun. The diner erupted into chaos. The night shift waitress screamed, dropping her coffee pot in a crash of ceramic and scalding liquid. A taxi driver bolted for the door, while 2 construction workers threw themselves behind the counter. But Marcus's focus narrowed to the man across from him, the detective who'd helped him bury the truth 30 years ago, now trying to bury him along with it. "God damn it, Marcus!" Eddie's voice cracked with something that might have been grief. "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" Marcus pressed himself against the booth's side, mind racing. The gun in Eddie's shaking hands wasn't steady, but at this range it didn't need to be. "How long, Eddie? How long have you been working for them?" "Since the beginning." The admission came out broken, defeated. "They had photos. My daughter—" "Christ, Marcus, you remember what I was going through with the divorce, the gambling debts. They offered me a way out." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Eddie hadn't been helping Marcus that night in 1989. He'd been managing him, controlling the narrative, making sure the traumatized 17-year-old saw only what they wanted him to see. "The crime scene," Marcus said, still crouched behind the booth. "You contaminated it on purpose. Your mother was already dead when I got there." Eddie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But she wasn't alone. He was still there, trying to make it look like an accident. I helped him stage it." "Who, Eddie? Who was in that trailer?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by distant sirens. Someone had called it in. Eddie's breathing was ragged, and when Marcus risked a glance around the booth's edge, he saw tears streaming down the detective's weathered face. "He said it was about protecting the industry, about preserving something bigger than one person's life." Eddie's gun hand wavered. "I believed him, or I wanted to believe him. The money didn't hurt either." Marcus felt his phone buzzing again, another text. Without looking, he knew it would be another threat against Sophia. They were watching. They'd always been watching. "The other witnesses," Marcus pressed, edging toward the booth's end. "The ones who died, you fed them to him." "I didn't know." The words exploded from Eddie like a confession years in the making. "I thought the payments were just for silence. When the accidents started happening, I tried to distance myself, but you don't walk away from people like that." The sirens were getting closer. Vancouver PD would be here in minutes, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't survive to see them. Eddie was trapped, had been trapped for 3 decades, and cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. "My daughter called me 20 minutes ago," Eddie continued, his voice hollow. "Said there'd been a man watching her house. Said he seemed to know her schedule, her children's names. They're not just watching you anymore, Marcus. They're watching everyone we love." Marcus's blood ran cold. If they had Eddie's family under surveillance, then Sophia— He pulled out his phone, hands steady despite everything. No answer at home. Her cell went straight to voicemail. "They took her, didn't they?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. Eddie's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry, but they said if I didn't clean this up tonight." "Where is she?" "I don't know. They never tell me the operational details." Eddie wiped his eyes with his free hand, the gun still trained on Marcus's position. "But they want the files back, all of them, and they want you to disappear." The tactical part of Marcus's brain was already working the angles. Eddie was emotional, compromised. The gun was wavering. The other diner patrons had fled, leaving them alone with the truth that had festered between them for 3 decades. "Eddie," Marcus kept his voice calm, reasonable. "Look at me." Slowly the detective met his eyes. In them, Marcus saw the same fear he'd carried for 30 years. The terror of powerful men who killed without conscience, who treated human lives like chess pieces to be sacrificed for a larger game. "We can end this," Marcus said, "together, but I need to know who's been pulling your strings." Eddie's gun hand dropped slightly. "You don't understand. This goes deeper than just Hollywood. Your mother found something that would have brought down—" The diner window exploded inward in a shower of glass and rain. Through the opening came the sharp crack of a sniper's rifle, and Detective Eddie Kowalski pitched forward onto the table, blood spreading across the manila envelope containing Helena Sterling's buried truth. Marcus dove for cover as a second shot shattered the booth behind him. In the distance, the sirens had gone silent. He was on his own now, with his daughter missing and the only witness to his mother's murder bleeding out across 30 years of lies. The sniper would be repositioning. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before the next shot found its mark. He crawled toward Eddie's body, glass grinding into his palms as he reached for the blood-soaked envelope. The crime scene photographs were ruined, Helena Sterling's image now obscured by the blood of the man who'd helped cover up her murder. But underneath, protected by the manila folder, Marcus's fingers found something else, a USB drive taped to the envelope's interior. Eddie had been holding out. Even in his final moments of betrayal, some part of him had been trying to make amends. Marcus pocketed the drive and low-crawled toward the diner's back exit, past overturned chairs and abandoned coffee cups that told the story of lives interrupted by violence. The kitchen door swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow alley where dumpsters stood like sentries in the rain. He sprinted toward his car, expecting the sniper's bullet to find him with each step. But the shots didn't come. They wanted him alive, at least long enough to recover whatever Eddie had been hiding. The realization provided cold comfort as Marcus reached his BMW and gunned the engine. His phone buzzed as he pulled into traffic, a video message from the same unknown number. Sophia sat tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, her Stanford sweatshirt torn at the shoulder. Her eyes were defiant even as duct tape covered her mouth. Behind her, Marcus could see rain-streaked windows and the distant lights of what might have been Vancouver's industrial district. The video cut to a man's hands holding a photograph, the same crime scene photo Marcus had seen in the diner, showing the mysterious figure in Helena's trailer window. But this copy was clearer, enhanced. The shadowy form was still obscured, but Marcus could now make out details that made his breath catch: an expensive suit, a distinctive watch, and most damning of all, a wedding ring that caught the light in a way that seemed familiar. A synthesized voice spoke over the image. "Your mother died because she threatened to expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government. The man in this photograph has built an empire on her silence. You have 1 hour to bring us the drive, or your daughter learns about her grandfather's true legacy right before she joins her grandmother." The video ended with GPS coordinates and a timestamp, 1:47 a.m. Marcus checked his watch. It was already 1:15. As he drove through Vancouver's empty streets toward the coordinates, memories crashed over him like the rain against his windshield. Helena Sterling in her final months, paranoid and drinking too much, muttering about men in suits who'd been asking questions about her past films. She'd been working on something, a project she'd called her insurance policy. At 17, Marcus had dismissed it as his mother's dramatic tendencies. Now he understood she'd been documenting her own death sentence. The USB drive felt heavy in his pocket, weighted with the truth Eddie had died trying to protect. Whatever was on it had been worth 30 years of silence and at least 4 murders. Whatever Helena had discovered had been dangerous enough to kill for repeatedly. The coordinates led him to a derelict film studio on the city's outskirts. Marcus crawled through Eddie's blood toward the manila envelope, glass crunching under his knees as rain poured through the shattered window. The detective's eyes stared sightlessly at the diner's fluorescent lights, his final confession dying with him. Another shot punched through the booth where Marcus had been crouched, sending splinters of wood and vinyl into the air. The envelope was soaked crimson, but the photographs inside remained intact. Marcus grabbed them, and Eddie's service weapon, muscle memory from his teenage years in Vancouver's rougher neighborhoods guiding his movements. The sniper had a clear line of sight through the window. Staying low was his only chance. He belly-crawled toward the kitchen, where the diner's emergency exit would lead to the alley. Behind him, Eddie's phone was buzzing incessantly against the table. Whoever had given the kill order was checking on their handiwork. Marcus wondered if they knew Eddie had already broken, had already confessed to 30 years of complicity. The kitchen door swung shut behind him as Marcus rolled to his feet. The cook had fled, leaving pots boiling over on the stove and the smell of burning grease thick in the air. The emergency exit was chained shut fire code violation that might cost him his life. He shot the chain apart with Eddie's gun, the sound echoing off the kitchen's steel surfaces. The alley beyond was a maze of dumpsters and delivery trucks, perfect cover from the sniper but also perfect concealment for ground teams. Marcus pressed himself against the diner's brick wall, trying to think past the panic flooding his system. Sophia was missing. Eddie was dead. Everyone who knew the truth about Helena Sterling's murder was being systematically eliminated. His phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time he answered. "Mr. Sterling." The voice was cultured, patient, the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I believe we need to discuss terms. Where's my daughter?" "Safe for now, though I'm disappointed in Detective Kowalski's performance tonight. 30 years of faithful service, and he develops a conscience at the most inconvenient moment." Marcus recognized something in the voice, an accent that had been carefully trained away but still lingered on certain syllables. Eastern European, maybe Russian, old money and older cruelties. "You were there that night, in my mother's trailer." A pause. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. Talented, beautiful, and unfortunately far too curious for her own good, much like someone else I could mention." The photographs in Marcus's jacket pocket felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Evidence of a murder that had been covered up by people with enough power to make police files disappear, to make witnesses die in convenient accidents, to turn a respected detective into a puppet dancing on strings. "What did she find?" Marcus asked, edging deeper into the alley. Helena discovered that her final film was being financed by interests that preferred to remain anonymous. Drug money from the Eastern Bloc, laundered through Hollywood productions. A pipeline that funneled hundreds of millions into legitimate businesses. The voice carried a note of pride. "Your mother threatened to expose everything. She actually believed the authorities would protect her." Marcus felt sick. His mother had died trying to do the right thing, and he'd spent 3 decades helping her killers cover it up. Every client he'd protected, every scandal he'd buried, every dirty secret he'd kept it, had all served the same masters who'd pushed Helena Sterling down those trailer steps. "The network she stumbled upon still exists, Mr. Sterling. It's grown considerably since 1989. Your own agency has been quite useful in that regard, though I suspect you never realized how many of your clients' projects were being financed through our channels." The implications hit Marcus like physical blows. Sterling Talent Management hadn't built its success on his business acumen alone. It had been guided, shaped, turned into another money-laundering operation. His life's work was just another lie built on his mother's grave. "Sophia," he said again, forcing his voice to remain steady, "will be returned unharmed once you surrender the evidence Detective Kowalski foolishly shared with you. The photographs, the files, the coroner's notes, everything. In exchange, your daughter lives, and you both disappear. New identities, new lives, far from Vancouver and far from the past you've been so determined to excavate. And if I refuse, then you'll join the other witnesses who chose unwisely. Though I suspect your daughter's death will be far less comfortable than theirs." Marcus closed his eyes, seeing Sophia's face from their phone conversation earlier. Bright, trusting, completely innocent of the blood money that had shaped her world. She was 22 years old, with a full life ahead of her, a life that would end tonight if he made the wrong choice. But somewhere in the darkness of his despair, Marcus felt something else stirring. The same cold fury that had driven him from the streets of Vancouver to the heights of Hollywood power. The same ruthless calculation that had made him the most feared agent in the industry. They'd killed his mother, corrupted his life's work, threatened his daughter. Now it was Marcus Sterling's turn to bury some secrets. Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his mind racing through possibilities like a chess master calculating moves. The voice on the other end waited with the patience of someone who held all the cards, or thought he did. "I need proof of life," Marcus said, stepping deeper into the alley's shadows. "A current video of Sophia, not some recording from hours ago." A low chuckle. "Of course. One moment." The line went quiet, leaving Marcus alone with the sound of rain drumming against metal dumpsters and distant sirens that would never reach him in time. He pulled out the USB drive Eddie had hidden, turning it over in his fingers. Whatever was on this device had been worth killing for repeatedly. His phone buzzed with a new video. Sophia appeared on screen, very much alive but clearly terrified. She was reading from a script. "Dad, it's 1:22 a.m. I'm okay, but they want you to." Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed another number he knew by heart, a number he'd called countless times over the years for advice, for comfort, for the wisdom of someone who'd navigated Hollywood's treacherous waters longer than anyone. "Marcus?" The voice was groggy with sleep. "Christ, what time is it?" "Frank, I need you to listen very carefully." Marcus pressed himself against the alley wall as a car passed on the street beyond. "Sophia's been taken. The people who killed Mom, they're cleaning house." Frank Brennan, his mentor, his father figure for 30 years, was quiet for a long moment. How much do you know? The question hit Marcus like ice water. Not who took her, or where, or what can I do to help. The question of a man calculating damage control. Frank? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. I told you to let sleeping dogs lie, son. Some secrets are buried for good reasons. The world tilted sideways. Marcus found himself staring at the alley's brick wall, seeing graffiti and rust stains instead of the man who'd raised him after Helena died. The man who'd guided his career, who'd helped him build sterling talent management from nothing. The man who'd been like a father to Sophia. It was you. The words came out strangled. You were in the trailer that night. Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 3 decades of lies. When Frank finally spoke, his voice carried the weariness of a man whose secrets had finally caught up with him. Your mother was going to destroy everything, Marcus. Not just the money laundering, though, that was bad enough. She'd discovered connections that went all the way to the State Department, programs that were keeping American agents alive behind the Iron Curtain, operations that saved thousands of lives. Marcus remembered the crime scene photograph, the shadowy figure in expensive clothes. He thought of Frank's custom suits, his vintage Rolex collection, the wedding ring he'd worn since marrying his second wife in 1987. You pushed her down those steps. It was an accident. Frank's composure cracked slightly. She was drunk, ranting about exposing everything. We were arguing. She stumbled backward. I tried to catch her, Marcus. I swear to God I tried. But Marcus was no longer seeing the distinguished agent who'd mentored him. Instead, he saw a younger Frank Brennan, 30 years ago, standing over Helena Sterling's broken body and choosing to cover up the truth rather than face the consequences. You've been watching me my whole career, guiding me, making sure I never got too close to the truth. I've been protecting you, Frank's voice rose. Do you think it was coincidence that your agency became so successful? That the right clients found their way to you? I've been keeping you alive for 30 years. The revelation hit Marcus with sickening clarity. Every major client, every breakthrough deal, every step up the Hollywood ladder, it had all been orchestrated. His success wasn't built on talent or determination. It was blood money, carefully laundered through the career Frank had crafted for him. Sterling Talent Management is one of their fronts, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. One of the most successful. We've moved over $200 million through your client accounts in the last decade alone. Your cut of those commissions bought your house in the hills, paid for Sophia's education, funded the life you're so desperate to protect. Marcus thought of his daughter, innocent and trusting, sleeping in an apartment paid for with drug money and covered-up murders. He thought of his mother dying alone while the man she'd considered family chose money over justice. Where is she, Frank? Warehouse District, Pier 47, the old Paramount shipping facility. Frank's voice carried genuine regret now. They want the drive, Marcus, and they want you to disappear. New identities, new lives. It's not the worst outcome. Marcus looked at his reflection in a rain puddle, seeing his mother's eyes staring back at him. And if I refuse, then I'll have to clean up this mess the way I should have 30 years ago. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the truth that redefined everything. The man he'd loved like a father had killed his mother and spent 3 decades making him complicit in covering it up. But Frank Brennan had made one critical error. He'd underestimated the very ruthlessness he'd helped create. He scrolled through his phone's contacts, past the A-list actors and studio executives, until he found a number he hadn't called in 5 years. Vincent Torino answered on the first ring. Marcus Sterling. Thought you were too legitimate for guys like me these days. I need a favor, Vinny, the kind you used to specialize in before you went respectable. A pause filled with unspoken history. What kind of favor? The permanent kind, and I need it done in the next 2 hours. Jesus, Marcus, what kind of shit have you stepped in? Marcus looked down at Eddie's blood on his hands, thought of his mother's broken body at the bottom of trailer steps, pictured Sophia tied to a chair in some warehouse. The kind that requires Old Testament solutions. 20 minutes later, Marcus was driving through Vancouver's empty streets toward Pier 47, but not with the desperate urgency of a father racing to save his daughter. He moved with the cold precision of a predator who'd finally identified his prey. The USB drive sat in his jacket pocket alongside a different kind of insurance policy, one that Frank would never see coming. The warehouse district rose from the fog like a graveyard of industrial ambitions. Pier 47 stood at the end of a crumbling access road, its windows dark except for a single light burning on the second floor. Marcus parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, counting security positions and exit routes with the tactical awareness Frank had drilled into him during their early years together. His phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. Package delivered. Your friend won't be joining tonight's party. Marcus smiled grimly. Frank Brennan's evening had just taken an unexpected turn. The warehouse's main entrance was guarded by two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a Cold War thriller-expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the bulges of shoulder holsters. Marcus recognized the type from his mother's films, Eastern European muscle with dead eyes and steady hands. But Marcus hadn't built his reputation by walking through front doors. He circled to the building's north side, where a rusted fire escape climbed toward the second-floor light like a spine of corroded steel. The rain made each step treacherous, but it also masked the sound of his approach. Through a grimy window, he could see Sophia bound to a chair in what had once been a supervisor's office. She was conscious, alert, and Marcus noted with pride studying her captors with the same analytical intensity he'd taught her to apply to her Stanford philosophy courses. Two guards flanked her, automatic weapons held with casual expertise. Behind them stood a man Marcus recognized from old newspaper photos, Dmitry Volkov, former KGB operative turned criminal financier. The same man whose voice had threatened Sophia's life over the phone. He was older now, silver-haired and distinguished, but his eyes retained the reptilian coldness of a practiced killer. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed. "Mr. Sterling," Volkov answered. "I trust you've brought what we discussed." "I'm here," Marcus said, watching Volkov through the window. "But there's been a change in terms. You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "That's where you're wrong." Marcus smiled, knowing Volkov couldn't see him. "See, I've spent 30 years learning from the best. Frank Brennan taught me that in this business information is the only currency that matters. And right now, I'm holding enough information to burn down everything you've built." Through the window, he saw Volkov's composure slip slightly. "The USB drive contains only Detective Kowalski's files, nothing we haven't contained before. The drive, yes, but there's something else, something Frank never told you about." Marcus reached into his other pocket, withdrawing a second USB drive, one he'd prepared years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. "See, I didn't survive 3 decades in Hollywood by trusting anyone completely. Not my clients, not my competitors, and especially not my mentor." Volkov was moving toward the window now, scanning the darkness beyond. "What are you talking about?" "I've been recording conversations for years. Meetings, phone calls, confessions, everything, including a particularly interesting chat Frank and I had 6 months ago about some of Sterling Talent's more creative accounting practices." Marcus paused, letting the implications sink in. "Audio recordings that are currently sitting in a dead man's switch with the FBI, the IRS, and 3 major newspapers." The lie came smoothly, delivered with the conviction that had made Marcus one of Hollywood's most feared negotiators. But as he watched Volkov's face pale in the warehouse light, Marcus realized something that changed everything. It wasn't entirely a lie anymore. Because tomorrow, if they both survived this, it would become the truth. "You're bluffing," Volkov said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "Frank would have mentioned such recordings." Even bound and terrified, she'd recognized something in his voice, the tone he used when closing deals that changed careers and destroyed enemies. The voice of a man who'd learned to weaponize trust. "What do you want?" Volkov's composure was fragmenting now, the careful control slipping like his accent when anger took hold. "I want my daughter released, I want safe passage, and I want the names of everyone involved in my mother's murder." Marcus paused, watching Volkov's reaction. "All of them, including the State Department contacts Frank mentioned." "Impossible. Those names would destroy a network that's been operating since the Cold War ended." "I know," Marcus smiled coldly. "That's exactly the point. See, I've had 30 years to think about what justice looks like. 30 years of watching my mother's killers profit from her silence. Tonight that ends." Volkov moved away from the window, barking orders in Russian to his men. Marcus counted 4 guards now, 2 with Sophia, 2 moving toward the building's exits. Professional deployment, but they were reacting instead of controlling. Fear made even trained killers predictable. "The recordings contain details about specific operations," Marcus continued, pressing his advantage. "Client names, transaction amounts, shipping manifests for art pieces that were actually heroin shipments. Bank account numbers in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. Shell companies that trace back to current members of Congress." The last part was pure fabrication, but Marcus delivered it with the conviction of a man who'd spent decades selling dreams to skeptical studio executives. Truth was less important than belief, and right now, Volkov was choosing to believe the worst-case scenario. You have 10 minutes to decide, Marcus said. After that, my dead man's switch activates automatically. 30 years of dirty laundry gets delivered to every major news organization simultaneously. And if I agree to your terms, the recordings disappear. Marcus thought of his mother's crime scene photos, of Eddie bleeding out in a diner kitchen, of Sophia's terrified face on the video call. He thought of Frank's voice confessing to 30 years of lies and felt something inside him crystallize into diamond-hard certainty. The recordings disappear, Marcus lied smoothly, and we all walk away to start fresh lives. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus was already planning their destruction. Every name, every account, every connection that had profited from Helena Sterling's murder would be burned to ash. He'd learned from Frank's mistake. Some secrets were too dangerous to keep, and some people too toxic to trust. Volkov was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all led to ruin. The State Department files alone would trigger congressional investigations, Senate hearings, criminal prosecutions. Probably, Marcus agreed, unless of course certain information never saw daylight. Through the window, he watched Volkov reach a decision that had been inevitable since the moment Marcus revealed his insurance policy. The old operative straightened his tie, a nervous habit that betrayed his carefully maintained composure, and gestured to his men. "Very well, Mr. Sterling, you've made a compelling argument." Marcus smiled, knowing Volkov couldn't see his face in the darkness, because hidden in the shadows across the alley, Vincent's team was already in position. The same specialists who'd handled Frank would ensure that Dmitry Volkov's evening ended with permanent silence. Frank had taught Marcus many lessons over the years, but the most important one had been accidental. Never trust anyone completely. Not mentors, not partners, not even family. Tonight, that lesson would save Sophia's life and finally balance the scales of justice that had been weighted against the Sterling family for 3 decades. "Excellent choice," Marcus said, watching Volkov move toward Sophia's chair. "But there's one more thing you should know about those recordings." "What's that?" Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that carried all the weight of 30 years' worth of buried rage. "They're not just insurance anymore. As of tonight, they're my mother's obituary." The truth hung in the air between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut through 30 years of lies and finally draw blood that mattered. Volkov reached for his weapon but never cleared leather. The old KGB operative crumpled beside Sophia's chair, his distinguished silver hair now matted with blood that pooled on concrete stained by decades of forgotten crimes. His men followed in rapid succession, professional killers reduced to cooling meat by specialists who understood that some conversations required permanent punctuation marks. Marcus cut Sophia's restraints with hands that remained steady despite the carnage surrounding them. She fell into his arms, trembling but alive, her Stanford philosophy courses having never prepared her for the arithmetic of violence that had defined her father's true profession. "Dad?" Her voice was smaller than it had been since childhood. "What just happened?" Marcus looked into eyes that held his mother's intelligence and his own capacity for seeing through comfortable lies. For a moment he considered crafting another fiction, building new walls between Sophia and the blood-soaked foundation of their lives. But Helena Sterling's ghost demanded honesty, and Marcus had spent too many years serving dead men's secrets. "Justice," he said simply, 30 years late, but justice nonetheless. They walked through the warehouse wreckage toward a future that Marcus could no longer predict or control. Behind them, Vincent's team was already sanitizing the scene with efficiency that would have impressed Frank Brennan if Frank hadn't been discovered in his Malibu study 3 hours earlier, the victim of an apparent heart attack that would puzzle coroners who failed to detect traces of exotic compounds in his bloodstream. The rain had stopped by the time they reached Marcus's car, leaving Vancouver's streets glistening under streetlights that cast everything in noir shadows. Sophia stared out the passenger window as they drove through empty intersections, processing revelations that redefined not just her father but the comfortable mythology of their family's success. "Sterling Talent Management," she said finally. "It was all built on lies." "Not lies," Marcus corrected, watching the city scroll past like frames from his mother's forgotten films. "Compromises, the kind that seem reasonable when you're 28 and desperate to honor a dead woman's memory, the kind that become quicksand when you discover they were designed by your mother's killer." At the airport, Marcus handed Sophia a passport he'd prepared years ago. Sarah Mitchell, graduate student, clean identity with documented history that would pass any scrutiny. The forged documents represented escape routes he'd maintained since building his first million, insurance policies against the day when past sins demanded present payment. "Where will you go?" he asked, knowing this was likely their final conversation as father and daughter. "Somewhere Frank's money can't follow." Sophia's voice carried new steel, tempered by witnessing how civilized men conducted uncivilized business. "Somewhere I can decide who Sarah Mitchell becomes without blood money defining her options." Marcus nodded, recognizing his own ruthless pragmatism reflected in her survival calculations. Frank's final lesson had been teaching them both that family love required the wisdom to know when letting go became the deepest form of protection. 3 months later, Marcus sat in his Beverly Hills office, reading newspaper headlines that detailed the federal investigation into Sterling Talent Management's accounting practices. The articles mentioned complex money laundering schemes, mysterious disappearances, and corruption networks that reached from Hollywood to Washington. They did not mention Helena Sterling's murder or the warehouse massacre that had balanced 30-year-old scales. Vincent had delivered the promised recordings to appropriate authorities before disappearing into whatever shadows spawned men like him. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Indictments were pending. The network that had profited from his mother's silence was burning exactly as Marcus had promised. His phone displayed 17 missed calls from reporters and federal prosecutors. Marcus deleted them without listening. Understanding that some conversations were inevitable but could be postponed until he'd completed one final obligation. The cemetery overlooked Los Angeles like a green jewel set against urban sprawl, its manicured lawns hiding bones of forgotten dreamers who'd gambled everything on Hollywood promises. Marcus knelt beside Helena Sterling's headstone, placing fresh roses that matched the red dress she'd worn in her final film. "It's finished," he said to the marble that bore her name and dates that bracketed a life cut short by greed and fear. "Everyone who was there that night, everyone who profited from your silence, they're gone." Wind rustled through the cemetery's oak trees, carrying scents of jasmine and rain-washed earth. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked noon with bronze tones that reminded Marcus of his mother's laughter during their Sunday morning pancake rituals. He stood slowly, feeling weight lift from shoulders that had carried secrets too heavy for any son to bear. The federal investigation would destroy Sterling Talent Management and likely send Marcus to prison. But justice served cold was still justice, and some prices were worth paying when they purchased a dead woman's peace. Walking toward his car, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, the possibility of sleeping without dreams of trailer steps and shadowy figures in expensive suits. His mother's ghost was finally quiet,